Okay, so we're working with animation. I'm setting up a basic scene with a sphere and a floor. I've made sure that my floor is directly, my sphere is directly on the floor. And now I'm going to just add some quick lighting and materials so that we can see this a little bit better. So for the sphere material, what I'm going to do is just create a new material, and under color, I'm just going to make it a checkerboard, put on the surfaces. And I just want to have something that I can see things like rotation and movement a little bit more clearly. So I'm just going to do 1 and 1 for the frequency, and I'll make this a little bit brighter color. Okay, so that's our sphere material. For the floor, I think I'll just make a little bit of a brighter material, like this perhaps. Maybe cooler is better. Okay, and then give it a bump channel so we can see the surface texture a little bit better, and give it a noise under the bump, and choose blister turbulence and make it really like small, so like -5, just a little bit of texture for the floor. Then I think what I'll do is just give it a target light, which is right on the sphere, but instead of a spotlight, we go to the light and change it to an area light, so it's more luminant. And under shadow, I'll make it have an area shadow, so it will look like this. Okay, so that's pretty good. Actually, I might move the light up a little bit overall. Let's see here, zoom out, just go above a little bit more. Okay, so here's our scene, and let's talk a little bit about how we can animate this thing. So to begin with, what we can do is we can animate the position, we can animate the scale, and we can animate the rotation. So those 3 things are going to be crucial for basic understanding of animation. Now, before we start, what I'd like to do is just change the mode that we're in from this model mode over here on the left to the object mode. And it looks like it has a little negative, right? It looks like film. So that kind of gives us the cue. And what this will do is it'll allow you to do things like animate the scale without having to go back into the timeline to do that. So the next thing to notice is that we do have a timeline down here. If we hit play, you'll notice the little blue cursor goes across 90 frames, goes back to 0, and repeats itself again and again. Okay. This button will let us go back to the start. This will let us go back to the end, and we can go back and forth. And then we have these 2 little record buttons. We have record active objects. An active object is one that is highlighted in the object menu. Okay, and then we have the auto keyframe, which will detect any change you make and record it. We're going to start out with just the record active objects, the standard record button, and talk about a little bit about how this works. So with our sphere, we can move it into position, let's say back here. And when we hit the record button, it will record a keyframe, right? So there's a little white box that shows up under frame 0 in the timeline. And when we move that, when we move first forward in the timeline, so I'm going to actually go all the way to the end. There we go, to 90. Okay, and I make a change to my object. So I'm going to bring it forward back to, actually, I'm just going to bring it back to 0 using the position palette down here to do that. And then if I hit a record again, you're going to get a series of dots indicating frames in between the form. And if I hit play, that ball is going to move from left to right. You'll notice the movement. It starts out slow, it speeds up, and it ends slow. This sort of slow in and out is the default. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how to change that if you wanted to have a more standard motion. But essentially, you can see that keyframes closer together are slower, those farther apart are faster. And so we can work with that. Now, obviously, this is sort of like levitating across the ground. It's not really rolling. So the next thing that we can do is animate the rotation, right? So when we hit record, we are actually recording both the position, the scale, and the rotation at the same time. So it's really dropping in essentially like 3 keyframes in that first recording. So if we simply go to the end of our timeline to 90 frames and we rotate it, we should get a transition in between them. Okay. So if I take and go along the X and rotate, I can see that down here under the Y or the P, I'm getting rotation. So I'm going to change this from 0 to 720. So that 720 is 2 revolutions, right? 360 is 1 revolution, 720 is 2. And hit return, and then I have to hit the keyframe button again for this to activate. If you don't hit it, it will just, you won't remember the change that you've made. So I'm gonna hit it here. And now when I go back, I should see the ball rolling across the surface. So that feels pretty believable. It seems to be, you know, if it was too much spinning or too less spinning, it would be very obvious, and you could definitely change that. So let's just show, for example, if I go to 90 and I just make this like 360, it'll look like, and hit the keyframe again, it'll look like this is kind of like dragging along the surface. Like it's a little bit too slow for that sort of transition. So, this is a bit of an experiment to see how much rotation you really need to make it look effective. For this, I think 720 is probably the best. So I'll hit the record button again. Okay, so we've got our rotation, we've got our movement. And the cool thing is that you can these nodes here, or these sort of keyframes, you can actually move them. So even when you've made a change in here, you can move them. So if I wanted to, let's just go, let's see if we can see this in the overview. Yes. So if we're directly above, if I drag this down a little farther out, okay, what it's going to do is elongate out the keyframes where I'm getting a longer sort of motion. So it's great to be able to have these 2 points, these nodes, these keyframes in place that you can alter and change. You can move them left and right. You can drag them out further and longer. And that might help if it looks like it's spinning too fast. You can drag it a little bit longer to make it seem like it's dragging going slower. So there's a lot of ways to edit keyframes once you've placed them in. Now the final thing is, you can alter the scale, right? So if we were to go, let's say, to keyframe 45, we could change the scale. So if I, instead of, I'll just do this uniform so I know what I'm doing here. I'm going to go down to the scale below and change this to 300 and 300 and 300. Okay, so now the scale has gone up. And if I hit a keyframe in, that scale is going to remain. Actually, it's not, because I have a keyframe at the end that goes back down to its normal scale. So the middle one sort of interferes with that. It starts out at 200, it grows to 300, and then it goes back down to 200 again. So that's pretty good. We do notice that at 300, it's sinking into the floor. So you likely want to change the position of that here. Move that up, and we can look at it in multiple views to see where it's at. So we need to bring this up higher, hit the keyframe, and now we have this arc of a transition that happens between. So in this case, now we should have a little bit better growth and shrinkage along that sort of timeline. And again, if it doesn't look right, you can just simply grab the node and drag it up a little bit higher, if that helps. Okay, so we've altered the position, we've altered the rotation, and we've altered the scale all along the timeline.